Thank you. Cool. So obviously, topic for tonight is design feedback for everyone. Can everybody hear me? We're good? OK. I have to apologize. I'm getting over like a cold, a throat thing, which is the worst time to be a presenter, but can't really affect that at all. So I wanted to do just kind of a quick survey. I know everybody's still eating and stuff. That's fine. So I wanted to get a show of hands. Who in the room considers themselves a designer of some kind? OK. And what about a developer? OK. And then we'll say like an other, like project manager, scrum master, owner, growth hacker. I don't really know what that is. OK, cool. So a pretty good mix, a lot of designers, a lot of developers. That's kind of what I expected, and that's good. I think there's something everybody can get from this. Like Adam said, my name is Eric Browning. I'm on Twitter, Browning Eric. I live and work up in the Akron area. I got this illustration from, I gave a different talk at a conference called Stir Trek, which is also here in Columbus. It's a one-day conference. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's a great time. So look that up. It's called Stir Trek. And they did these illustrations for all the presenters, and I really liked it, so I try to use it wherever I can now. This is my first time speaking and first time attending at the Columbus Web Group. I watched some of the back talks, and they were really good, so I feel like I have big shoes to fill. But it seems like a really great group, and I did want to call out the organizers, Adam, Sean, and Kevin. They do a ton of work behind the scenes that you guys don't see, which is really awesome. They're the big reason that this group has grown as big as it has. They're really well organized. They walk you through the process. They do a lot of things that, frankly, people who run other meetup groups just don't do. And that's really cool. So I wanted to give them kudos for that. So a little bit about me. I've been a designer professionally now for about 11 years, which is kind of depressing. It makes me feel old to say, but that's the truth. And I've had a chance to work at a bunch of different companies and do a bunch of different things along the way. I worked for a period of time at a company that made these super lifelike animatronic characters. And we had like touch screens that controlled them and things like that. And that was a lot of fun. And Abe's up here. He was one of them. I just wanted to point out, if you can't really see here, it's dark and everything. The hairs are individually poked in on his head. If you put a wig on, it doesn't look natural. So I just wanted to bring that up. I know a lot of us have sort of tedium in our lives or parts of our job that feel like they're repetitive or a chore, but just keep in mind that there's at least one person out there whose full-time job is to poke each hair into these figures' heads. After that, I did some other things for a little bit, and then I ended up in Akron at a game company. It was called Blue Frog Gaming. It's kind of not really around anymore. But we did some awesome stuff. We did a puzzle game called Polar Puzzles. It was on iPhone, and it was right at the time that the iPad came out, if you guys remember that, and that was pretty cool. So we were learning how that worked and everything. We slid this penguin around, and he was trying to get to his chicks to rescue him. It was great, and we were really proud of it. And it went absolutely nowhere in the marketplace, which is sort of a downside of the game market in general. This is really hard to see, apologize. We then moved on. We did a bunch of strategy games. These were all games where you build a bunch of spaceships and you go fight someone else and you destroy their spaceships and steal their resources and stuff. And then you would pay money so that you could rebuild faster and seek vengeance. So revenge basically paid my bills for a couple of years there. And of course, along the way, like a lot of people in this industry, I did a bunch of websites, worked with some agencies and things, where we did a bunch of websites for kind of boring consumer brands, basically where we're trying to sell people stuff, which is just part of it. And I say all this stuff not to brag or boast or anything like that, but just to illustrate, in all the things I've done, the one sort of constant has been change. And that sounds kind of cliche, but it's really true. Things are always changing in this field, right? If I went back on the things that I learned, especially technically 11 years ago in college, like I'd be almost worthless today, right? Things have changed so much in that time, and they continue to change. So I think everybody here tonight should be commended a little bit for coming out to stuff like this. Because it's really important that you do that. It's really important that you keep your skills up, and learn and share with those who are just starting out. I used to be super active in the meetup and conference community, especially like in the Akron, Cleveland area. I have not been for about a year now, thanks to this guy. This is Theo. He just turned a year old about a month ago. So I've been obviously busy with that. We also moved about a month ago. So it's been good, but I'm just kind of easing back into it. And I wanted to present tonight because I've worked with a lot of developers and project managers and people who are not designers or don't have design backgrounds. and they've struggled with giving feedback or trying to give feedback. So I wanted to try to help out with that a little bit and give some tools you can use. So what we're going to talk about tonight, got it broken down here. We're going to set up what I think the problem is, what the scenario is that causes people to have problems. Talk about why people struggle with that due to their backgrounds and what they know. Talk about what exactly we mean when we say feedback. How is it useful? What can it do in a project? And then, of course, we'll get to how to give good feedback. And then I'm going to put everybody on the spot a little bit. We've got sort of a pop quiz. We're going to actually do a little bit of interactive portion. And I'm going to ask you guys to use some of what you learned tonight to give some real feedback on some things we'll look at. And then there should be plenty of time for questions and discussion. And I think they usually have some social time after that. And go get some more pizza, have a beer or something. So it should be good. All right. So here, in general, let's say a coworker comes up to you. They might have something, they might physically show it to you, or maybe they contact you on Slack or whatever it is, and they have a design to show you, something visual to share. And they say, what do you think of this? How does this look? Right? Can I get some feedback? And for a lot of us, that's kind of a scary question, or kind of an unsettling question. I think a lot of times we hear that, we clam up. This is kind of what we look like in response. You can't really tell up here. So side note, that's supposed to be a deer frozen in fear in headlights. It's actually very hard to find a good free image for that. He just looks really happy sitting there in the forest. But we'll pretend that he's just frozen in fear and he doesn't know what to do. So I wanted to look at the root cause of those feelings, right? Why does this happen? This sort of anxiety and discomfort that a lot of people get when they're posed questions like that. And I think much of it can be rooted in background. A lot of people who are not designers didn't go to art school. They didn't learn formal critiquing or anything like that. And they probably didn't have an internship where they were at a design studio or something where they're seeing other people giving feedback on a regular basis. But I think it also has to do with routines and what our work days look like, what you guys do every day. By that I mean, a lot of you at least, I guess I don't want to say most given our design here, you don't spend your days working with fonts, evaluating color palettes, sketching and prototyping. You might, but a lot of people don't. Instead, a lot of times their days look more like this. Writing code, looking at code. Maybe doing code reviews, or kind of getting together to plan like an application architecture. Maybe they're planning out people's time and allocating resources that way. So these are all very different mindsets and different tools that can be used. Also, if you're one of those people maybe you're just doing business. I don't really know what that looks like. I have worked alongside developers pretty much my entire career, and I can also say that I know in reality most of their days look like this usually, but that's not really something we're going to address tonight. So let's talk about feedback a little bit, right? What is feedback? What is a design critique? Tackling the latter up there first, I think a design critique is simply kind of that more formalized session where you're getting together to share opinions and critique a specific piece of work. A lot of times there's rules around that. There's sort of a structure about who can speak when, or maybe everybody shares something before the design is defended. It's a much more formal thing than I'm talking about right now. For our purposes, I'm referring to those informal little meetings where someone just grabs you in the hall and asks your feedback, or maybe just sends around a quick email to the whole team that they're just looking for some thoughts. Just want a little bit of help. So bringing back to the first there, what do I mean by feedback? Well, I looked it up online, of course, like everybody does, and I found this definition that I like to start, and that's a thoughtful consideration of design. That's from Khoi Vinh. He worked on the New York Times for a long time. He's done a bunch of apps and a lot of high-profile things like that. And I thought this was a great definition, but the more I looked at it, I realized it was much too vague. It's elegant, and I'm drawn to that, but it doesn't really get into that much into the heart of what we're trying to do. So I arrived at this one, which is a little bit more detailed. I think we can consider feedback, evaluating primarily design and aesthetic choices to try and improve the outcome. And I think the key point here is that we're not just sharing opinions for opinion's sake or to feel like a participant, And we're not trying to tear somebody down to build them up stronger later or play office politics or something. We're genuinely trying to make the product and the outcome better. And that quote comes from another designer who's slightly less famous, which is me. So understanding feedback a little bit, what is the point of giving feedback, right? Why is it useful? Well, as a designer, I can tell you that it's truly invaluable if done well. I can think of a few projects in my head where good feedback, or sometimes the lack of good feedback, virtually changed the course of a project. And that sounds kind of melodramatic, but it's really true, right? Good feedback will help a designer in a number of ways. The first good thing that good feedback does is help provide that sort of quick gut check against my assumptions and my overall approach. As a designer, when you're designing something, even if you have a lot of really good research, along the way you're making a lot of little assumptions. You might make an assumption about how something's going to be used, about what someone's frame of mind is going to be in when they're looking at it, or what device they're on, or something like that. If I'm mistaken really early on in a project, I make a wrong assumption, that could get really messy. I could really screw things up if no one else looks at it or no one else discovers that. So bringing them on early to just kind of give me that quick gut check is really useful. It can also be helpful to get somebody to look at it just with fresh eyes. Sometimes we stare at a design for hours or days or weeks or whatever it is, and we get that kind of tunnel vision where we're blind to obvious things. So getting that fresh eyes helps uncover things like that as well. Another one is to uncover unforeseen biases, or something that I've heard called sacred cows that are part of design. And I think there's been a lot of talk about bias, specifically in the tech industry, but in all industries lately. And I've read enough to know that I personally bring a lot of bias to the table with any project I start on. And I'm not even talking about the obvious, right? I'm male, I'm Caucasian, I grew up middle class, I went to college. I'm talking about the other things that I think even more of us take for granted, right? I have decent vision, I have control of my mental facilities, I'm not colorblind, I can tap or click small things easily. So getting feedback, it increases your chance to expose your project or to get feedback from somebody who might have experience with a different viewpoint than yours, or have different limitations, or maybe they have a family member who does. In general, they're just going to be coming from a much different point of view, and that can be really valuable, again, especially early on. And as far as the sacred cows, that was in reference, I'm sure you've seen a picture, in India. They treat cows very highly over there. So you'll see a picture where they have the highway and the flow of traffic. All these people have flowed around this cow. Everybody's making tons of concessions, to avoid disrupting this thing because it's so valuable to them. And that's something we as designers tend to do sometimes. I'm starting to build this project, and I end up with this purple sidebar. And I love that purple sidebar. And we change this, and we change something else, and something else gets tweaked. But everything I do, I end up bending and distorting because I have to keep that purple sidebar in place. But if somebody can give me good, honest feedback and kind of call me out on that and say, look, that purple sidebar isn't that important. You got to let it go. You got to drop it. That can be really valuable. Another thing is that you can eliminate surprises late in the process, and it makes your whole team feel involved. It's a more collaborative way. For surprises late in the process, the best example I can think of, it's not web necessarily, this is print design, but a long time ago I was working at a company, and they ended up doing a catalog design for a large furniture company. And it went through several rounds of revisions and sign-offs, and everything was good, and they ended up printing the catalogs, I think something like 500,000 of these full-color catalogs. And it didn't have the company logo on the front. And people had signed off on it along the way, not very many, but a few people on both sides had looked at it, and people from the client had signed off, so the company I was with said, well, you guys signed off on it, there's not much we can do, you have to pay to get them reprinted. And the client, they said, well, yeah, yes, we did sign off on that, but, and we could pay for it, but all that other work we do with you, all the video work and interactive and everything, we're going to pull that. So what ultimately happened is my company and the client ended up splitting the cost of printing all new catalogs, which I think was something around $750,000 on each side. And that could have been avoided if they had more people involved early on. That was obviously a surprise extremely late in the process and a very expensive surprise. And even if your example might not be that dramatic, that's good. Hope that's on the video. Even if your example is not that dramatic, you can still see how that could happen. And the second part there, it's going to make your whole team feel involved. If you guys launch a product or an application and most people haven't even seen it, it might look good. They might like it. They might say, wow, the designers did a great job. The design team did good work. But imagine if there had been much more frequent collaboration and feedback. All of a sudden now it feels like, our project looks good. People remember when design decisions were made, and they remember having a part in things. It makes it feel like a collaborative win, which is an awesome feeling. So we've talked about the good things. Obviously, what are some examples of bad feedback or things not to do? This is a big one, that I don't care, I'm not a developer, or I don't care what it looks like. I think in general, apathy is one of the hardest things for us to overcome in our line of work. People think because they don't have the background that they don't have anything valuable to add. And my whole point for presenting tonight is to tell you that you do have something valuable to add, and it's not that hard to help. But even if you don't have strong opinions, say on visuals or something like that, I'm going to guess that there's things that you do have strong opinions on. You might care how easy it is to use, or how easy it's going to be to sell to clients and customers, or if it's going to work within your code environment. So it's fine to sort of structure your feedback to fall back on what you do know, rather than just throwing a line out there like this. And I think equally as kind of damning of a statement as this is the silence. And I don't have a slide for this one, but it's a crushing feeling when you send something out, maybe email or Slack, something like that, and you don't get any responses at all. It's important to give people feedback, even if your feedback is, I don't have anything to add, but I'd love to chat and have you walk me through your process, right? It lets everybody know that their work is valuable and that they're considered a valuable part of the company. When no one sends anything, it just feels terrible. This is another one. It looks a bit off, but I can't put my finger on it. And that's an easy one to fall into, especially in subjective matters like visual design. And I don't think this one is inherently bad, assuming you can follow it up with something that's a little more concrete. For example, you might use a reference to be able to make a comparison, which we'll talk about more in a minute. Or you might ask the designer for their justification on why they did something, which we'll also talk about in a little bit. The big issue here is that you're basically creating a lot more work for everybody to do. Because as the designer, maybe something was wrong with it, and I need to go back and fix that. But not only do I have to fix that, I have to sort of work with you and kind of fish out of you to figure out what the problem was in the first place. And it's just an inefficient way to work. Also bad, I don't know if you can see up here, this is a bunch of tight, defined little red lines and pixel specs. This is what I would call like overly prescriptive feedback. Someone asks you for feedback and you just give them a detailed list of exactly what they should do. And this one's easy to fall into too, especially if you have some experience or you're a more senior person. A lot of times I think there's a good chance you're not going to be a better designer than your design team or the designers involved, even if you think you are. But even if you are, you have to think about what the future is going to hold. If someone comes to you with something and there are some legitimate problems, and you solve it like this, you tell them exactly what to do. Just go to your Photoshop or Sketch or whatever it is and do these things and that will fix it. If you do that, what do you think the likelihood in the future of them making the same mistake is? Right? They're not really learning anything. They're just kind of carrying out orders. And that's not what we want. Let's take a vote. This is one a lot of people like. This is especially great for teams where you have a lot of people with big titles involved or a lot of different stakeholders. But this boils down to something called design by committee. And it never really results in a good outcome. The work of a designer, especially I would say a good designer, is to take a lot of disparate sources of information and ideas and goals and work with them and sort of serve as that filter that ends up creating something unified and cohesive as the output. And as you can imagine, if you have a bunch of people tossing their opinions in, taking a vote, a lot of times this is combined with the previous one, where they're all telling you something specific to do. As you can imagine, you're removing that filter from the process entirely. You're not going to get something that's cohesive. You're not going to get a good unified product as a result. So finally, right, let's talk about some ways we can give good feedback. if you look up how to give feedback or how to give design feedback online, you'll see a lot of articles that essentially describe design 101 to you. And that's not my goal here. I don't think that's particularly valuable to try to sort of teach everybody to be a half-assed designer. What I'm suggesting instead is that you can give good feedback and provide something useful, no matter your background or who you are in the process, without getting into it. So again, in contrast to the things that we're looking at online, I'm not going to go into contrast or hierarchy, color, typography. These are things designers are really into, and if you want to get into them, that's great, but that's definitely a topic for another night. These are things designers like to talk about at length, but we're mostly not going to discuss at all. Moleskine journals, another one up there. So I'm not going to bore you guys with a lame acronym, but I just have some simple steps. We'll go through these that I think anybody can take to try and provide useful feedback. And it's important to note, I think these are useful if you don't have something to add. If somebody asks you for your feedback or your opinion, and you have something concrete, don't worry about these. Just share that with them. You don't need to overcomplicate it. But I found in the past, a lot of people, I asked people for feedback, and they expressed to me that they don't know where to begin, or they don't know how to respond, or they come up with one of those phrases like I came up with earlier that weren't particularly useful. So we're going to go through these one by one, establish common goals, ask why, look for pain points, and think bigger picture. So the first one up there is establish common goals. And it's important to note these aren't in a particular order, and you don't need to use all of them or anything like that. They're just tools you can use, tools you can leverage. So the first one here, establish common goals, that's making sure you have a common goal and scope in mind for your feedback. It's easy to have your communications break down in a spectacular fashion if you and the designer aren't on the same page. Who is the design for? What's it trying to accomplish? Is it something new or an update of an existing product or feature? Is this a large rebuild, or is it just a quick patch that we need to do before it goes out at 5 today? As you can imagine, if one person's expectation is here and the other's here, your communication is going to be off from the start. A great way to establish common goals, if your organization or your team has them, is to leverage these sort of marketing deliverables or UX deliverables. This is an example of some personas up here, which are a great place to start. So if a designer comes to you and they say, I'd like some feedback on this, and you talk to them to figure out what the goal of this is. Maybe they say, we're trying to add two-factor authentication to our app so that Ahmed, will feel more comfortable using our app on his phone, right? That's a great, really well-defined goal. You both understand who you're building for, you both understand what you're trying to build, and you understand why you're building it, right? So you have a good reference point to start from. You have a good shared language that you can work with. Like I said, these are examples of personas up here, but any sort of like customer segmentation could be useful, or even just like marketing guide, what you're trying to do, branding, things like that. Similarly, you want to consider the goals of the feedback itself. Somebody might ask you for your thoughts, and sometimes it's useful to clarify, are you looking for a detailed critique? Is this something we should set up some meetings for or go over several times? Or do you just want one last set of eyes on this because it's got to go to the server by 5? Maybe they're just looking to get typos fixed. Again, if you're expecting one thing and the other person is over here, you're not going to meet in the middle very well. So defining that, or just figuring out what exactly they're looking to do with this information can be really helpful. So to establish common goals, I suggest using some phrases like this, right? Who is the target for this? What are your next steps? The next thing you can do is to ask why. And I think asking why is hugely important, and it's often overlooked entirely, usually for assuming or just inference. What I'm referring to is asking why a particular design choice was made. If you don't like something, instead of just making a suggestion or just telling them you don't like it, maybe try asking why they did what they did. I think any good designer should be able to tell you why they made a certain choice. Maybe not on the spot. They might have to think about it and gather their thoughts. And sometimes the reason is just it fit the aesthetics, which is may not be satisfying, but sometimes that's the reason. But there should be a reason behind it. I would go so far as to say, if someone regularly can't give a reason why they're doing what they do, I would probably call them a bad designer. I know that ticks some people off. You can send hate mail to me there. We can argue on the internet like humans do. So when you're asking why, you can parlay criticisms into useful talking points. So instead of trotting out one of those sort of bad cliches, asking why, instead of just telling them, the menu shouldn't be on the left, you should move the menu to the top. Maybe you can ask why they moved the menu to the left. Because there might be a piece of information that you didn't have, or they might have a good reason for that. The cool thing about this too is that if you're asking why, and you're forcing them to explain and be articulate, there's a good chance it's going to trigger something in the designer, that you're going to make them think critically about their work, and they might see things differently or end up hashing out a problem without you being involved at all. I know we've all been there where we're trying to figure out a solution or something, we ask somebody for help. In the process of explaining the problem to them, we sort of figure out the solution in our head, right? And that happens pretty frequently when you're asking why. And that's a powerful thing, partially because you look like a genius and all you did was ask why. You didn't really follow it up with any sort of brilliant thought. But you're basically helping the designers get there, which is really powerful. So when you're asking why, you could use phrases like this. What made you choose X? Or I'm looking at this, I'm struggling with why. Can you walk me through your process? Can you tell me how you arrived at that? So the third piece up there is look for pain points. And I think this is particularly useful when you're looking at design and you want to give some feedback, but you don't know where to start and you can't find anything. What I'm suggesting here is that you take whatever it is you're looking at, screen, collection of screens, design system, break it down into as small a little piece that you can and try to dig through that to see anything that you might be able to find improvement with. And you're digging deep to kind of find your own pain points with the work. And it might seem like the things you're looking at or the things you're noting are kind of petty or unimportant or just your opinion, but they could lead to something valuable. So you want to break down into specific pieces. You don't have to use a tool or something. I'm just talking about doing this visually. So you have maybe a header. Think about that header to yourself. Does it seem to fit with everything else? Is something off-putting to me? Even if I can't define it, is something off with it? Or does it seem like it's okay? And again, here's a place where falling back on your existing expertise is really good. Is it constructed in a way that's going to work with your current code? Or if your background is in marketing, for instance, maybe does this match the look and feel of our competitors? Or if that's not what we're going for, does it contrast with our competitors? And the larger part of this is that not to get a list of tiny pieces of things that you don't like and just give them to the designer, but get your list of things that you have issue with and work through that with them to try to find patterns and themes. A good example here is maybe I'm looking at design. I don't really know what to offer up, but I see a place here where some text is hard to read. I see another place where maybe a long piece of text is going to get cut off. I see a couple other places where I make a note of the text being small. Those are all very small things by and of themselves. But if we think about them as part of a larger pattern and theme, you might talk it through with your designer and you might realize that maybe the hierarchy of images to text of the whole piece is off a little bit, right? Maybe the visual weight is just, there's too many pictures compared to how much text there is. And coming up with that piece of feedback is kind of a much more advanced thing. You'd probably be expected to have some background to do that. But everybody can sort of go through and kind of nitpick and get a list to try to dig through to find patterns and themes. And that's the powerful part here, to get to those more concrete issues. So when you're looking for pain points, you might use some phrases like, I'm looking at this, I'm diving deep into the menu, and something with the navigation feels off. Or you might say, like my example, I was looking at this, I have a lot of things to note about text sizes. Let's just talk about text sizes overall, and take some notes or go through some notes. So in contrast, we're going to kind of go the opposite way now and talk about thinking big picture. And this is just that. It's thinking much more broadly. So we're going to avoid any design specifics like we were talking about before. And instead, we're going to look at kind of tone and intent and meaning and those sort of more abstract concepts that are still very much part of a design. So you're going to try to think about how something, maybe it makes you feel, or what it represents, and build off that. And it's good here, if possible, to try to avoid, again, that specific instruction like we talked about earlier. You might say, man, I really hate the purple. Get all the purple off the page. Well, that's very direct and very specific, but it's somewhat limiting, and it's probably not the best piece of feedback. If you could think about the larger meaning and sort of the intent, and you could say, okay, there's a lot of purple on here, and our product is widgets exclusively for teenage boys, and all this purple makes it feel pretty feminine. That's a much more easy to understand piece of feedback. So you might use phrases like, this, X, feels very Y. Maybe Y is soft, large, small, high-end, whatever it is. Description there. And so does this. Do we see our product similar to X? Let's think about this. Let's look at this design and think about this as part of our broader plan. I have sort of an example there. This is from a designer you might have heard of. His name's Dan Mall. I've seen him talk a couple times. He does a great job. Definitely check him out if you get a chance. But this is an exercise he does when he's working on a project with a company. He'll go through with them. Maybe they'll have a design brief or initial session. And they'll say something like, we want our product to be playful. We want our site to be playful, our application, whatever it is. And he might question that and think, is playful what they were really going for? So he'll go out and find a site that is definitely playful, like this squeezy yogurt. And he'll take a screenshot of that, and then he'll take one, and he'll put it over here, and he'll drop their logo in. And he'll tell them, Go-Go Squeeze is very playful. Does CNN want to be playful? And what that does is sort of, it gets people thinking. It starts conversations that lead to something much more valuable. So what it might be is that they really just wanted colorful, or they wanted bold, or something like that. That they were just sort of, they didn't have the language, or they weren't able to be clear in that initial direction. So what I'm not suggesting that as part of your feedback you need to create this or anything. I'm talking about more of mentally you can kind of do this exercise. If a designer shows you something and you're thinking, does this fit our brand? Think about a competitor. Think about swapping your logo for theirs or vice versa. Does that fit? Does it not fit? Or maybe in terms of aesthetics, there's a site you really like. If you put your logo there, does that fit? If it seems like a good fit, maybe you can let your designer know, and that's something they can use kind of as inspiration or a way to go. But this is a really powerful exercise, and I love the way he does it. So I kind of wanted to share that here just as a way to look at higher level concepts, but in a very simple way. So we talked about the 4 points. And beyond those, there's really only one main piece of advice I have. Excuse me, and that's to be honest. I think a lot of times people worry, or we tend to worry about hurting someone's feelings, or saying something that offends them, or maybe someone's has seniority over us, and we don't want to tick them off or something like that. But we have to go back on the fact that anybody in your team, as designers, I would argue it's artistic, but it's not art in a sense. It's not fine art. We're trying to communicate. We're trying to solve a problem. So if you can't be honest about it, there's basically no point to giving feedback. What you can fall back on is that if you're doing feedback correctly, you're trying to find opportunity rather than just finding fault. Like we talked about earlier, you're not trying to tear somebody down, or you're not trying to play office politics. You're genuinely trying to make the product better. So you should feel empowered in that way to share honest feelings. And as a designer, you should not feel offended when you understand that people are genuinely trying to improve the product or service that you're working with. So giving design feedback is a challenge. I can't deny that. I haven't given you guys any sort of magic bullet tonight because I've been doing this a long time and I don't think there is one. It takes practice and a lot of effort and just being exposed to it to be really good at it. But I think as we've talked about, if you take your time, you're honest and use some simple exercises, I think anybody can help a designer create a better product, which is really powerful. So these are the things we talked about: establish common goals, ask why, look for pain points, which is our patterns and themes, and think bigger picture. And remember, you don't have to use all of them. You don't have to do them in order. They're just tools you can use. So Mentioned it briefly, but this is the company I work at. It's Coffee and Code. We're just coffeeandcode.com. Feel free after this to say hi. Got some swag up here. But before we get too much farther, I'm going to put the entire room on the spot a little bit. As mentioned, we have kind of a pop quiz. I thought, I've come to some meetings like this, a lot of meetings like this, and I've been part of them. And it's cool to hear somebody talk about something, but a lot of times you go home and you forget it, or it just seems sort of abstract, or it's like, oh, that works great for them, but I don't really know how to apply that to me. So we're taking a little bit of a risk here, and we're going to do a little bit of live kind of design critique role play. So I dug up a couple samples that I want to get your guys' feedback on. And these are student work. I found them. They're hypothetical redesigns of larger brands. And those work really well because they're not real, so no one's going to get ticked if somebody tears it apart or something like that. But they're famous brands that we're all going to be familiar with. So we're just going to pretend that we're all coworkers, and we, I stop you in the hall, and I say, hey, what do you think of this? So this first one here, I'll just walk you through it briefly, is a redesign of NewYorkTimes.com. And this is the home page. And I show it to you guys. Sure.
Well, okay. So thinking bigger picture, if I were to think in the bigger picture, I noticed this looks a little bit like, sort of to me, first impression, like a BuzzFeed kind of, very popular new media, sort of younger crowd. Is that how the New York Times wants to be aligned? I get the feeling, well, I won't project, but yeah, is that how we want to be? I mean, ask the why, right? Is that how we want to be aligned?
Absolutely, yeah, I think it's a great one. I think you look at this, it looks significantly different than what you're used to seeing from New York Times. It looks different probably than what you expect from a news site. So yeah, asking why they went with this approach in general is a great way to start. So who's got something else?
It would be nice to have like a picture, for instance, like whatever they're talking about. Because I'm looking at words where there's a lot of words, so.
Okay. So comment there was that a picture would be nice. It's kind of a lot of words, kind of distracting. I would suggest maybe trying to spin that, like the gentleman mentioned in the back, maybe asking why. Maybe say, hey, I would expect to see a picture here. Can you walk me through how you got to this? Because maybe this is designed for people who are on low bandwidth devices or something like that. Or maybe the goal, I don't know. This is a good layout for getting a lot of very shallow information at once, but it's not really giving you anything deep. And maybe that was the goal, right? Where a picture is just going to reduce that information density. So, yeah.
You're showing me this whole page, and there are specific areas within the page that you would like more feedback on. Are we talking about overall layout? Are we talking about typography? What is the focus of what you're asking me for? I mean, what top 3 things do you want me to focus on in this piece instead of just generally throwing out ideas?
Sure. Okay, great. Yeah, so comment there was, what specifically are you looking for? This is kind of this is a broad thing. Maybe it's too broad. I don't understand what the goals are. I don't understand what you're hoping, I don't understand what you're hoping to get out of this conversation. That sounds kind of confrontational. Could probably word it more tactfully, but yeah, that's a great one. Yeah.
I guess I would ask, is it supposed to look like a newspaper? Is that what they're going for?
Okay. I think that's a great question. Yeah, again, is it supposed to look like a newspaper? We're getting back on kind of those early goals, which I think that's a very good way to go with this. When you're seeing something that's so unfamiliar, I think that's really good. Cool. Yeah.
I think I would maybe ask how you as the designer would expect a user to navigate and use this site. Walk me through what you think a typical user would do here.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, so comment there is asking the designer what they expect the user to do, what the intended kind of user behavior is, looking at this. Because I think that's a very good point. A lot of times here, I've heard the comment before that some people don't even know if they can tap or click somewhere to see anything more. So, is this an overview page? Is it supposed to lead to other articles? So looking into the behavior, I think, is a great way. Yeah.
Is it supposed to, I would ask if it's supposed to be used on a mobile device, because that looks like it would be concerning on a mobile device.
Sure. Yeah. So again, asking about the goals and kind of seeing if there's a specific device or usage in mind that way.
Kind of going along that way is who's the target demographic and how do they consume information?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the comment there was, who's the target demographic? How do they consume information? I think that's good, because I think questions like those are all getting at things that, a lot of us look at this and maybe we don't like it, or we think there's some things immediately wrong. But before just telling somebody that, we're digging a little deeper, trying to figure out, maybe they meant something else. Maybe there's some information I'm not privy to. Yeah.
Right, another thing I would mention is, like, I'm not quite sure what page I'm on. Like, why do we just have the logo? Can I have more information about, for example, if I didn't know the New York Times, I wouldn't know what page I'm on right now.
Absolutely, yeah. So that's a great one. So up here we see, like, if you're familiar, you know that's the Times sort of most simplified logo. But nowhere else on here, at least that I can see, I guess, other than the URL, does it actually say the name anywhere? And that's probably going to be an issue for a lot of people. But I think, bringing it up in the form of a question is a great thing. I think that'll lead to a lot of other questions too. This area is kind of problematic for a lot of people. On any modern device, do I need to see the time? Why is it showing the time there? Could you walk me through that, or what's justification there? Cool. All right, so let's go to. Do you want to do another page of the Times, or go to an entirely different one? We'll go on. Entirely different one. Cool. So we've got another big one, Wikipedia, right? And this is a single main page, the home page of Wikipedia. So what do you guys think of this? This is my latest and greatest.
What was your thinking on the vertical format?
Overall, or something of a specific piece? Okay, right. So the question there, what is the thinking behind the vertical format? I think you definitely frame that, again, kind of falling back on maybe competitors, or as kind of the expected design patterns in the industry. We don't typically view things in that way. So what is the thinking behind that? Yeah.
I would ask, like, when you go to Wikipedia, what is maybe the one thing that a user would want to do? I might assume it would be to search for a specific article, whereas here it looks like half the page is devoted to a specific article that someone may or may not be interested in.
Absolutely, yeah. So questioning, what the goal of the page is. When a user comes here, maybe it's two parts. What do they typically do, which we might have, analytics data or something to support, and for a lot of us, we're going to assume that's search, which is just kind of buried up here. But then I guess the broader thing is, are there organizational goals? Are we trying to become more of an inviting kind of news presentation, a site where we invite people to read and find more linked articles and read, rather than just looking up a specific thing? Maybe that's a goal, and this layout would be much more suited for that. Whereas if the idea is simply to get you to search, it frankly is pretty terrible at that. So, yeah.
I'd be a little concerned about the pagination. Just from a glance, I'm not sure what it's controlling. Above, below, it looks like it's that bar in the center, assuming that is pagination.
Right.
And what's the thinking about what should it do, and what should I expect from that?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's a great one there. There's this UI element that sort of a calendar pagination widget. It's definitely, it's not a common thing. I would ask them what the idea is there. What the idea is, how is it supposed to function, and then what is, visually, what's its relationship to these things? Is that strong enough, or is it supposed to be up here, and is that strong enough or clear enough? Sure.
I guess I have a problem, and I'd like to understand why you have the text over the center part of Mandela's face, especially given historical value and importance to him, why is it there and not maybe lower or higher?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So yeah, so I think there's two parts to that. One is kind of a content issue, and the other one is maybe a technical issue. But I would ask the justification for what was the thinking behind this. The large text right in the middle of the image, specifically when the image you've mocked up, it doesn't even work well for. Is that going to work well when we start dynamically populating that with images every day? Is it going to be easy to read? Is it going to be obscuring important things? So, yeah, in the back.
Yeah, I think what I see a page like this, start to ask, is this an opportunity to look at what were you thinking about for breakpoints? We're just starting to talk about.
Yeah, comment there was breakpoints, and I think that's an important one too. Sometimes when somebody's showing you something, it might lead to conversations of things that don't exist yet, but maybe they should exist. They should be thinking around that. And it's fine to sort of point them in that direction. Like I mentioned, you're sort of falling back in your expertise, that technical expertise, to say, okay, this looks good right now, but as we shrink a little bit or grow wider, perhaps, what happens with this kind of intricate grid, you've got here and these other elements, what sort of a hierarchy are we giving to things? Yeah.
So my question has to do with I was wondering what you were thinking when designing the search feature up there. It seems like most of the site is pretty flat and very hard edged, but the search feature seems to be kind of inset and also rounded.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a great example of kind of you're digging deep there. That one piece feels off to you, right? It doesn't seem to match anything else, and asking why. Were they trying to make that stand out or something? Was it intended to contrast? Because if so, frankly, you probably should be more bold or something like that. It sort of feels accidental or sort of feels unintended. So I think that's great to look at that. And then that might lead to something too. Maybe you were looking at other pages. Maybe they've got a bunch of rounded buttons. So maybe they were maybe they had this idea for, these interactions would be rounded or something that it just doesn't work that well. But, you've got to kind of get to that pattern to find it out. So cool. I think we have time for one more. Anybody? Show you another page. I'm sure this will spark something. This is, so I've tapped or clicked Nelson Mandela to go to his page, and this is what I see. Yeah. That's fine.
So with the users that visit Wikipedia, are you trying to emulate that you're a reference site, or are you trying to emulate as being a news site? Are you trying to keep everyone up to date with current events, or, as I said before, are we trying to act as a reference site?
Sure.
So what are your goals?
Right, exactly, yeah. The goals, I know we touched on that a little bit with this overall, but I think definitely with this one, goals come into play, very highly. If we're trying to be a reference, if we're trying to give, people that quick information at their fingertips, this is terrible. I mean, I'm on a large monitor, and I see almost no information without scrolling. So, yeah. Last one, sorry.
I would ask about the navigation. I'm not sure where to go. For example, there's a top nav and then there's a hamburger.
Yeah, I've got a hamburger. Yeah.
And is the T's the font size?
I would assume so, yes, but that's a great question as well. Yeah. Cool. All right, so I think that's all we've got time for as far as actual kind of presentation, but if anybody's got any questions or anything, I will be here and I'll be out there later. So thanks a lot. Oh, cool. Okay. Cool. Does anybody have any questions or anything? Sure.
A lot of folks in here are accustomed to dealing with, but for me it's relatively new. So if I'm working on a project for somebody, we'll call them a client. Really, it's an internal client, but we'll say a client. In this case, it's a video, right? And we've got a shot. It's a gentleman holding a microphone. It's beautifully aligned to the left third of the frame. There's a tasteful blur behind him with a little bit of bokeh. It looks really nice, right?
Okay.
And they say, we want to go ahead and crop that out. We want it cropped out, right? Which means either, like a big black bar or like Zoom that kind of blows it. What I'm saying is their feedback is like objectively bad, right? Anybody that sees it's like, yeah, oh no, it looks way better the way you had it. How do you deal with that? And I think it works both ways, right? Because I've probably given feedback that's objectively bad, right?
Sure.
So either, whether it's receiving or giving it, in a world where, I know it's subjective, but some stuff is just bad, right? It's just worse.
Right.
How do you, because I'm sure you've had to deal with that plenty, right? How do you deal
absolutely. So essentially we're kind of, how do we approach these same concepts, but from the other side of the fence? When we're the designer and somebody has given us feedback which maybe we disagree with, or just from our own knowledge we just know is wrong. I think, so that can be a tricky one. I think what I like to do, and this, it may not apply to your situation, but most of my work is on the web, and I have a huge backlog of resources I've saved of people that have done research, on research on how big buttons should be to tap, and research on how text is more clear than icons and things like that, or in research on why the fold doesn't really matter anymore. So I can come back to them and I can say, my opinion is that we should keep it this way, and here's some people who have done some research that kind of back that up. In your case, like with an artistic shot or something like that, I don't know if you might be able to show them both options side by side, and maybe try to illustrate the things that work better in the other one. I know if the person is here in the frame and they're looking this way, you want to have space over here. If you could show them, okay, well here they're looking this way, but they're cut off, so it's like our eyes don't have anything to follow, and you can kind of demonstrate that way. But that's a tough one. Yeah, I don't have a magic bullet for that one. Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to just speak up that. One thing I've done that really has helped, like you said, is comparison. Another one, like you said, is to have resources. I once gave a 4-page dissertation on why I aligned something a certain way, and they never asked another question again. So, but the third thing that really has helped for me is that there's this thing in developmental psychology. If a young child is screaming and yelling, all you have to do is acknowledge their feelings. Just simply say, I get you're upset, this is no fun, I'm sorry. And I've now started using that to clients sometimes. I'm like, I understand where you're coming from, I understand why you think this way, and then I move on, and they don't go back to it. So as long as you acknowledge their feelings, they sometimes just want to be heard, basically. So.
Well, kind of going along that line, I was going to say, can you maybe ask for them to kind of explain their idea, or to
absolutely.
go into what their thinking is, because they might be thinking of something that may not even apply, or something of that nature.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Like we talked about asking why, and again, just spin it back on them and ask why. A lot of times people, especially if you don't have an artistic background or design background, they're not even thinking that there's like rationale and like research behind these things. It's just like, well, I like it better when it's this way. If you can prod them a little bit, kind of respectfully, you might help them see like, well, I wanted it to do this way, and it wasn't just my opinion. It works better because X and Y. Yeah, in the back there.
I hope it's okay, but unless people are out of criticism, like we brought our project in from user testing today, and we saw the meetup, so we brought it, and if anybody has any feedback, we'd like to get some opinion on user experience, problems we're facing.
Cool. And you're going to be out there? Okay, cool. Well, look him up if you want to pitch in some advice. Yeah.
So I noticed definitely with the developer and speak on the designer, there's technical limitations. So how do you go about, how does a developer kind of explain those limitations to a designer? Because I know sometimes the language between developers and designers, it could be Spanglish.
Right.
Anyway.
Yeah, I think the ultimate goal there, I don't know the quick answer, but the ultimate goal is to you want to have you want to kind of build empathy between the two of you. Like you don't want either side to feel like, oh, the designer's just doing things to make them pretty and they're hard for me to build. But then you don't want the designer to feel like, well, the developer's just telling me we can't do something because it's hard. But if both of you, I guess, are kind of giving those honest explanations of, look, we can do that, but it's going to take a lot longer. And maybe suggest like, hey, can we work together a little bit to find something that gets a similar effect but is easier to build? Try to offer up kind of suggestions so you don't just feel like you're that wall that's shutting them down. Kind of like she mentioned, like acknowledge that what they're looking for is important, or is valuable, enough that they think it's worth doing. Say, I respect that, I understand that. It's just going to be really tough for us to do. Maybe we can try X or Y instead. It's what I would try to do. Cool. I think we have time for like one or two more. Anybody else? All right. Well, yeah, if you don't want to share publicly, I'll be out there hanging around for a little while. So thanks again. I appreciate it, guys.